Are you shy? Are you introverted? Or do you have social anxiety? That's what we're going to be talking about today, because these are three terms that often get confused with each other, but they're actually three very different things. But before we get into all of that, I just want to say hello to all my new subscribers. We've had a big boom this week. It's been really cool. And if you are listening and you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure to just subscribe to the podcast. And please drop a review or a like. And it really helps the channel grow as much as possible. And I want to get this out to as many people as possible, because my goal is to help as many people with social anxiety as I possibly can. So I want to point out before we start today that this is for educational purposes. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety, but I don't want anyone going away with this diagnosing themselves. Please understand that in order to get a diagnosis, you actually have to be diagnosed. You have to be diagnosed by a mental health professional, by a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. So please don't go to diagnosing yourself. Make sure that you actually go get help and get a proper diagnosis. The reason I'm making this video is so you can get an understanding of what these three things are, and so you can see if maybe you could have some of the symptoms. And if that's the case, then you might want to go get checked out. Okay, so I want to start with introversion. So we're going to talk about introversion, shyness, and social anxiety. I want to start with introversion because I think introversion is actually the furthest away from the other two. Because introversion is actually much different than shyness or social anxiety. Introversion has to do with, it's a personality trait, and it has to do with really preferences. Introversion doesn't really have to do with fear. You can be an introverted person and have absolutely no fear in social situations, or at least, let's say, normal levels of social fear. But an introverted person is somebody who really prefers to spend time alone. Or at the very least, they get quite exhausted when they're spending time with a lot of people. They can go and socialize and they can talk to people and really have no problem expressing themselves, being themselves. They're not necessarily anxious. They just don't really like it, or they just get really tired of it, and they prefer to go home and recharge. And this is the opposite of an extroverted person, who is someone who really likes to be around people. And when they're tired, the thing that gets them going, gets them amped up, is going out, going to the club, going to a party, and being around more people. That's an extroverted person. They like to be around people. What's interesting is most people who have social anxiety, I would say, most of them are probably going to be more introverted. Now, again, that doesn't mean that most people with introversion are socially anxious. It just means that for the people who do have social anxiety, they're going to land on probably the more introverted side. However, there are extroverted people who have social anxiety. There are people who really like to be around people. Like, in theory, they would love to be around people, but the anxiety holds them back. And sometimes these people in social situations, they won't necessarily be that reserved. They'll talk, but they'll be talking very anxiously, and they'll still have some of the other symptoms that we'll talk about later, the replaying situations, preparing themselves for speaking when they're going into a social situation. So you can be extroverted and have social anxiety, but it's not as common. It's more common that people with social anxiety are introverted, but again, not all introverts have social anxiety. Most introverts don't have social anxiety. In fact, social anxiety really, it is a fairly common mental health disorder. It consists of about 12% of the population, which is a pretty big percentage, but again, it's not the majority of people for sure. So that is what introversion is. So that really doesn't have to do with fear. It really has to do with preference. So now let's talk about shyness. Shyness is another personality trait. And again, none of these are you're going to find in the diagnostic criteria. You're not going to find it in the DSM, nothing about shyness. It's really a psychological term. But shyness refers to someone who is a bit uncomfortable in social situations. They take a little while to warm up. But the difference between someone who's shy and someone who has social anxiety disorder, a person who is shy, they can function. They can live their life. They go to work. They have a job. They have friends. They can date. They can do all the things that they need to do. The thing with them is they're just a little bit more reserved than, say, the average person. It takes them a little time to warm up, but they're not in constant fear. They're not dreading social situations. They're just a little uncomfortable, but if you get them comfortable, or if they get themselves comfortable, they're just fine. The other thing is someone who's shy is not necessarily going to do some of the other things that a person with social anxiety disorder will do, like replaying situations after they occur, or thinking about what they're going to talk about before it happens, or being consumed by just immense fear. And someone who's shy is not necessarily going to avoid social situations. They'll still go and do what they have to do, even if it makes them a little uncomfortable, because they know that eventually they'll warm up and everything will be fine. It's not something that really disturbs them. So that's someone who's shy. It's just a personality trait. You don't necessarily have to do anything about it. I mean, you could if you want, if you think it'll help you be, make more friends or have a better dating life, or maybe move up the ladder at work. You might want to work on your shyness. I mean, certainly it never feels good to feel uncomfortable around people, but it isn't really necessary because you can live your life. You can still function. And that word, function, I want to focus on that word because that really is the main distinguisher between social anxiety and shyness. It's not the only, but it's the main one, function. Function means, can you live your life? Someone with social anxiety disorder has a very hard time living their life. It's very hard for them to go to school. It's very hard for them to go to work. It's very hard for them to make friends. It's very hard for them to date. I made a short video recently on Instagram that was titled, Social Anxiety is 24/7. And I believe that. And that is part of the criteria in the DSM for social anxiety, is that this is a persistent fear. This is constant. It doesn't necessarily say 24/7 in the DSM, but it does say it is persistent. And that is true. This is constant. All day long, you're worried about social situations. And I also want to point out, so let's just go through the specific criteria for the actual DSM. What does it actually look like? Again, make sure you're not diagnosing yourself, but I think it is important that we understand what we're talking about here. So the first one is a fear of specific social situations, or social situations in general. Now, these social situations are not just talking necessarily. They can be just about talking and socializing to people. But for some people, the fear is around being perceived at all. It could be about walking in public. It could be around eating in public. So it's not necessarily about talking with people. So this is another distinction between shyness and social anxiety. Is someone who's shy, they can go out in public, they can eat, they can do things. People with social anxiety disorder, they're terrified of just being looked at. So they might not even take themselves out for lunch, for example, because they can't stand the fear of being looked at and judged. And that takes us to the second part of the diagnosis, which is fear of evaluation or fear of judgment. This is constant fear that they're being judged by other people. This is another slight difference from someone who's shy. Someone who's shy might think about the fact that they're going to be judged, but they're not crippled by it. They're still going to talk. They're still going to do what they have to do. Someone with social anxiety disorder, this consumes them. It's all they think about. How do people think about me? What are people thinking about me? I have to make sure that people have a good takeaway before I leave this social interaction. So they get very in their head and they're constantly trying to fix themselves or make themselves be essentially unjudgeable to other people, which of course is impossible. The third criteria is that these social situations, whichever they are, could be, again, eating in public, walking in public, talking to people, whichever ones that this specific person is afraid of, that the fear occurs every single time, or pretty much every time that they're going to go do something. So it's not like a one-off situation, right? So someone who's shy, they might get anxious before a presentation, right? So once in a while, maybe they have a couple presentations a semester in school, and they're going to get uncomfortable for that day. This person is uncomfortable every single time they have a social situation, and it is intense fear. It isn't just, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable. It is the equivalent of having a type of fear that someone might have if, let's say, they're afraid of spiders. Imagine you have a phobia of spiders, a real phobia. Like the mere thought of them, the mere sight of them sends you into a panic. This is the type of fear we are talking about. It is not just, I'm slightly uncomfortable. The fourth criteria is that the feared stimulus, whatever the feared social situation is, and again, for a lot of people with social anxiety, it's all social situations or most social situations, is that they're constantly avoiding them. They're constantly avoiding them. Every time they feel afraid, they back out. They skip class. They find a reason to get out of a work presentation. They don't go on dates. They don't try to make friends. Pretty much anything that they have to do that makes them feel really uncomfortable, they'll just avoid it. Again, someone who's shy is not necessarily going to do that. They can live their life. Someone with social anxiety, they're really just struggling to function. The fifth diagnostic criteria is that the anxiety is out of proportion. Now, we could argue this is a bit subjective, but I think if you're constantly worrying about something or you're thinking about things 2, 3, 4 days beforehand, and the intensity of the fear, you're having heart palpitations, you're sweating, you're having a hard time breathing, this type of fear, that is out of proportion with the social situation, right? And again, someone who's shy is not going to have these intense physical sensations. The intense physical sensations can look different for everyone. You know, I've talked about, for me, when I was younger, it was this knot in my stomach. It was just this twisting knot that would never go away. And so for everybody, it's going to look a little different, but it is an intense fear. It's not just a little uncomfortable. The next criteria is that it's been occurring for 6 months or longer. So this is just a way for the clinician to figure out, are you just going through a temporary struggle in your life, or is this something we really have to worry about? Have you been dealing with this long enough that this is a concern? Again, someone who's shy, that's one where it might match up. I mean, someone who's shy has probably been shy their whole life. This is really just a diagnosis criteria to help the clinician understand what's going on with the person in their life. And the last criteria that's really relevant here that I brought up in the beginning is that it causes significant distress to the person's life and it impairs their ability to function. So again, they're having a hard time going to work. They're having a hard time going to school. They don't have any friends or many friends. They can't get out and date. They can't do basic things. And again, for some people with social anxiety, it's even simpler than that. I mean, they can't go to the grocery store. They can't pick up a phone and order a pizza. They can't do some of the simplest things. For me, when I was younger, when I was in my teens, I was so afraid that I pushed off getting my license until I was about 21 because I was so afraid of being in that car with a driver and with other students in the back judging me while I was driving. So I didn't get my license because of how intense this fear was. So for everyone, it's going to be different. But so if you've been interested or curious about, well, how bad is my social anxiety? These are the questions you want to ask yourself. Again, do not diagnose yourself. Make sure you actually go to a mental health professional. But this is what you want to ask yourself. How severe is it? Is it happening pretty much every day? Am I having severe physical symptoms? Am I constantly? So here are some other symptoms that are not necessarily in the diagnosis, in the diagnostic criteria, but are very common. Replaying situations constantly. Are you constantly thinking about all the embarrassing things you did? Are you afraid that you're going to come across embarrassing? People are going to see that you're anxious. Actually, that might be part of the first criteria of the diagnosis, that you're afraid of that people can see that you're anxious. But another one would be thinking about scenarios prior to the actual scenario. So days leading up, you're just constantly thinking about it. So there isn't so much about the rumination in the diagnosis, which is interesting to me. I'm not sure why that's not in there, unless they just assume that's what people understand as fear. But the rumination is a big part of social anxiety. So that's another criteria you want to look at. Like, are you constantly thinking about this all the time? Okay, so that's a general run through of what shyness is, what introversion is, and what social anxiety is. And again, you can be introverted without these things. You can be introverted with these things. Introversion just has to do with your temperament, what you like to do. Do you like to be around people? Do you get energy from people, or do you get exhausted? Now, one last thing I will say is sometimes people get confused because they don't know if they're introverted or if they're just anxious, because, well, how am I supposed to know if I don't like people, if I don't like being around people, or if I get tired around people, if I'm so anxious? And this is one of the things that I realized when I was younger. I assumed I was very introverted because every time I was around people, it exhausted me. But it exhausted me for a different reason. It exhausted me because I was in a constant state of fear. Now, I'm not as introverted as I used to be. Like, I like to go out. And I do get energy from people. I still get depleted and I still like my alone time, but I do also like to spend time with people. So if you have social anxiety, it can be hard to actually distinguish like what kind of personality you are, because the fear is so palpable that kind of drains away any joy you could potentially receive from a social situation. So that's one thing you want to think about. Like, don't slap a label on yourself. Don't assume that you're introverted if you're socially anxious just yet. Until you work through the social anxiety, you might find, oh, you know what? I actually do like socializing with people. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Again, please don't use this as a diagnosis for yourself. Do not self-diagnose. But if you're hearing this and you're going, ooh, I think mine is more severe than I'm just a little shy, you might want to go get some help. You might want to seek a therapist. And I hope you guys found this helpful. If you guys are interested in more educational topics like this, you can let me know. You can always email the show. Otherwise, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.